North Committee. We've got a very full agenda today, everybody, some important things to discuss. So I'll just keep my sort of opening remarks quite brief to get us going. I just wanted to reflect the important role that this committee made in expressing concern about the proposed closure of ticket offices across the country. Obviously, we were one of the voices that expressed our concerns alongside many others. I think it was clear to us that the closure of offices would have had a significantly greater impact on the north of England, given that people don't have, if you like, the same facilities at stations here, but also because of some of the disruption we see on our services mean that the public are often seeking help from staff in those offices. I think it was understood, I think, by many people that this would not have been a forward step for the railway, but would have taken us significantly backwards. And we will come on to discuss next steps and where we go from here later on the agenda. But I just thought it's worth, at the start, recognising the role of this committee, the fact that we do speak clearly and loudly on a cross-party, cross-geography basis for the North. And I think when we do that, obviously we do get heard, and I think it's important to recognise that. Less positively, of course, since our last meeting, we've had significant announcements related to infrastructure that have affected the north of England, particularly around HS2 and the proposals for Network North, which are taking shape, which we might challenge the name because it would appear that not all of Network North is in the north, but we can discuss that as we go through our agenda today, because we do have an item on infrastructure. So, colleagues, without any further ado, I will just move to I will pause and just ask for any apologies to be recorded if they need to be.
Morning, Chair. There's been apologies from Councillor Brown this morning.
Thank you, Gary. Let's move to item 2, obviously declarations of interest. Those with interest to declare a relevant interest, please follow the the procedure as set out. Item 3, this is to approve the minutes of our meeting on the 13th of September.
I move
Are they approved? Martin?
I was just agreed.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So we move to item 4, and this is actually a little bit of history, I think, for the Rail North Committee, because the issues about accessibility, and particularly the access for disabled people at railway stations across the north, often are the last item on the agenda, or if they're on the agenda at all. And yet, these issues are of fundamental importance to the residents we represent, many of them, not just disabled people, but older people as well. Too many of our rail stations are inaccessible or difficult to access, and we believe there needs to be a much greater focus on standards of accessibility at our rail stations from the industry as a whole. So it is symbolic, actually, that this item is going first on the agenda, and I think it always should be a first on the agenda item. If some people can't use railways, that is a first order issue, and it needs to be treated as such. And what I'm hoping today, colleagues, is that you will support the establishment of a task and finish group on this very issue to try and work up a plan for how we address some of the serious accessibility issues that we experience on the railway. Just looking back to that consultation on ticket offices, we saw a huge outpouring of concern from disabled people, from older people, and I think we've got to kind of go off the back of that and address much more fundamental issues of accessibility at our rail stations, and consider perhaps more innovative ways of funding access improvements, perhaps through greater commercial use of the rail stations, community use of the rail stations, more devolved responsibility for managing rail stations. That's where I think we want to take this discussion and develop a real plan of action to open up our rail stations to all people. That is every single person living in the north of England should be able to access every single rail station in the north of England. It's as simple as that. So with that, I'm going to ask David Worsley to speak to this item and to take us through the proposals for the task and finish group, which is going to oversee this work. David.
Okay, yes, thank you, Mayor Burnham. This is just a short paper today. In the main body of the paper, I've put a little bit more detail in just to explain that accessibility for persons of reduced mobility is not just about things like lifts and ramps and so on. It includes items people forget about, information provision and induction loops, things like that. And also there's a brief note to say that inclusive accessibility is not necessarily just about disability. It can also include age and indeed any other characteristics which impact how people experience the railway. And just linking back to what Andy said there, the ticket office consultation did reveal that there are differences in how different groups experience the safety on the railway. And so with that in mind, actually one of our legal team here at Transport for the North is volunteered to do a full equality impact assessment as part of this programme and wants to come along to the first meeting of the task and finish group, which is mentioned in the paper. But really what the paper is just getting your approval for setting the objectives for the member working group, so developing a detailed proposition for the future of accessibility at the North stations, supported by an action plan and a timeline, and also crucially the composition of this group. I'll be involved in running it. We're looking to get a representative from a TOC, from an external body with expertise about passengers with reduced mobility, representative from Network Rail, and then from the members. We've already had Councillor Swarbrick volunteer to be the North West's representative, but we're looking for elected members from the North East and Yorkshire and Humber to complete the group.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Swarbrick has indicated, I don't know whether we do have a volunteer from both the North East and Yorkshire and Humber today, but it would be good if there was somebody who was prepared to step forward. Councillor Swarbrick first.
Thank you. Well, my hand went up before I realised I was going to be mentioned in dispatches, so I just think that, just to reiterate really, that we're absolutely passionate about this in Lancashire, and we have a bizarre case where there are some people who get on a train at Burnley when it's going east, and then because when it comes back, the other side of the platform isn't accessible, they get off at Accrington. You know, how bizarre is that, for instance? So very definitely support this. Thank you very much, Rupert. Oliver?
Thank you. Probably want to start by saying I'm slightly jealous of Councillor Swarbrick's background image, but secondly, to say, Andy, I associate myself with everything that you said already about the importance of the work. The accessibility of rail network is absolutely fundamental. It has to work for everybody, and everybody has to be able to access it equally. And at the moment, that just simply is not the case in South Yorkshire, as I'm sure elsewhere across the north. So absolutely right. I will take that away as an action for us to quite quickly come back with a recommendation from Yorkshire and the Humber, and I'll obviously speak to colleagues in West Yorkshire about that as well. And we will come back quite swiftly and make an offer about who can be our lead on that, and we'll engage fully in the work.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Oliver. Thanks for picking that up, because I'm really keen for this work to get going as quickly as possible. Would anybody else like to contribute on this item? Jamie, Mayor Driscoll. Morning, Jamie.
Cheers, morning, Andy. Actually, very much similar to what Oliver's said there. But yeah, I mean, we've discussed this previously. I'm fully supportive of this and work closely with a lot of our disabled groups. I think the best thing we'll do, rather than me, because I happen to be here volunteering, I'll have a chat with everybody else in the region, and then we'll put someone forward who can do this justice. Great.
Thanks as well, Jamie. So let's try and get that all sorted out in the next couple of days, if that were possible, colleagues. There are also going to be industry representatives, aren't there, David? And colleagues from the Great British Railways Transition Team and Network Rail obviously will need to be on the group. And I'd be really keen that, you know, we rather than debate endlessly the difficulties and the challenges, we've just got to get it straight into practical. Where can we start moving stations forward? And we need to, I would say, we need to say to the industry, they need to work differently. They are not easy to work with when it comes to enhancing rail stations, and they need to adopt. We need to be clear with them that we need a different approach to allow a much more flexible and urgent way of tackling some of these issues. Mayor Rotherham, Steve.
Thanks, Andy. I think the potential group that's missing from this are train manufacturers, and I'm only saying that because we you know that we've rolled out a new system in the city region, which is fully accessible. There's no step, you know, there's no man the gap or anything like that. It all fits in nicely together. So whilst we quite rightly, I believe, concentrate on stations, actually the rolling stock themselves, why some people in some parts of the country are still buying rolling stock that's got step access. I genuinely don't understand it. So perhaps it must be something to do with cost. That might be prohibitive, I don't know. But get a manufacturer there and see whether we can change the culture of the way in which even manufacturers think about the rolling stock and the types of trains that people should be able to access.
It's a very good point, Steve. David, can we take that on board, please?
Yes, certainly, to include rolling stock. Actually, coming back to what you said earlier, Andy, you mentioned Great British Railways Transition Team. I've not actually mentioned them in the paper, but they have been in touch with me and they said they'd like a representative in addition to the Network Rail representative. So if we want to minute that, I'll include GBRTT in the team as well. We've already got somebody from them who wants to be involved.
Terrific. Okay, David. I would like to have an update on the work of this group at every Rail North committee, because I intend, as I said at the start, to signal a completely different way of working on this issue. If you are somebody who cannot access your local rail station, I can tell you for certain this issue is at the top of your agenda when it comes to the rail industry, and it is frankly just completely unacceptable that it's never been treated as such. And it is very much often an afterthought. Darren?
Yeah, just to re-emphasise that, Chair, that it is very much our intention, taking your lead, that this would be a standing item going forward for RNC. So we have that in train.
Great. The figures I've got are that only 43% of our stations in Greater Manchester are fully accessible to all platforms without steps or non-compliant ramps. So, you know, 57% aren't accessible. It's just, and I guess the figures will be same for pretty much every other sub-region represented on the call. So,
well, yes, actually, I mean, the assertion that overall about half were not acceptable was based on some work that Northern did in 2017, and I've actually been made aware recently that they've done some more recent work with a more stringent definition, and it's actually fallen, and they now, I think it's a bit less than 50%. So the situation seems to be worse than we thought, I'm afraid.
I don't know how it can get worse, but there we go. So the big issue, Steve? On mute.
I couldn't even see the button because the sun's in my eyes, because it's like the south of France here in Liverpool at the moment. In regard to stations, there is a way you can do it. I mean, I think devolution has demonstrated that you can put this as a priority. So we've got more than 2/3 of our stations that are accessible, which I think is the highest percentage in anywhere in the country. But that's great, isn't it? That it's higher than elsewhere. But it still means, as you said, 1/3 of the stations aren't accessible. So we're denying the opportunities for people who have got mobility issues to access 1/3 of our network. That's the reality of it. And unless we push it to the top of the agenda, and I think this came from actually something that I flagged up 2 or 3 sessions ago, if you remember. I was trying to pose a little bit about how well we're doing in regard to our stations, but also identify the fact that even though we're ahead for years, and our ambition is to have a fully accessible network, and we've just opened a brand new station, and I think that's a model for stations across the country. It takes into consideration not just people with mobility issues, but neurodiversity, audio-visual, all sorts of wonderful things that you can build in to networks, and that's really the way we should be going.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for your strong support for what we're trying to do here, and thanks for the offers of help to get the membership of the Task and Finish group sorted out. Thank you to you, Rupert, for taking on the onerous job of representing the northwest of England on this group. We'll keep you on your toes, Steve and I. But no, we're grateful to you for doing that. And we look forward to seeing the work of the group. I think in the first instance, I would say we need to sort of have a plan for how we can move the what's the timetable for moving the figures? How many stations can be moved out of the inaccessible category year on year, and start to plot a kind of roadmap, a rail track towards getting to this point where all stations are accessible. And I think breaking it down like that, I think is the way to go. And if they say there's not enough funding, well, then we say devolve then, and we'll find the way of funding it if we've got greater ability to use the stations for other purposes. Steve? Sorry,
it's just that you said about funding. There is a pot of money called Access for All, which our officers will know. I don't think the quantum's moved in the right direction over many, many years. So there's something there that we could already use if we can persuade the current government or the future government to increase the funding quantum. Then we could get more stations done very, very quickly. Because what you don't want to do is reinvent the wheel, and then you have to go out for procurement and all that sort of nonsense. Whatever we can do that expedites this issue as quickly as possible.
Well, yes, I mean, just to answer that point, this originally got on the agenda because we'd noticed that Access for All had only done 15 stations in the north in the previous control period, which, well, you can do the math, as they say. That's only three a year, and it would be 80 years to sort the whole of the north at that rate. So that's not acceptable, obviously.
And David, I think one thing that maybe you could bring back to us at the next meeting is in many ways the inadequacy of the funding sort of landscape. As Steve said, there is a pot, isn't there, which is a separate pot held in the DFT. And Network Rail will often say, well, we don't fund this kind of stuff, it's done by them. But that doesn't lend itself to joined up decision making, does it? Nor does it get quick decision making where it's all done via the department. I think we should have a look at the landscape when it comes to the funding arrangements, and look to a much more, as I say, devolved approach. This, if this committee, for instance, was given, well, what's the budget for the North? If that was something that we got told in a control period, and then we get some sort of freedom to sort of see what we can do with that budget that's fair to everybody and all sides, then I think that's the kind of way we need to move to a much more hands-on approach to this issue, given that councils, combined authorities, can actually bring in match funding to make, fully funding these schemes from national level just seems to me to be such an old-fashioned way of doing this. Go to a much more partnership funding approach at local level, where councils can bring in, extra regeneration and other partners. This is the way to tackle it, and we've got to get them we've got to make a real paradigm shift here in the way that they're going about this whole thing. So, no pressure on any of you, but that's what we're going to do, and we're going to move things more quickly in 2024 than they've ever moved before. So hope that's clear to everybody. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
In some ways, item 5, everyone, continues some of those themes. I don't think we need to spend long on this. I touched on it at the start. Thank you to everyone for the cross-party approach that we took, and it was the right call that we made, because I don't think this proposal would have helped our residents. And I also should say thanks to Transport Focus, because I think they did do a faithful job in reflecting the feeling that was clearly felt here and in other parts of the country as well. So we thank them, and indeed the government for listening. I'm glad the government have listened and dropped the proposal that was on the table. The items on the agenda is just to sort of say, well, where next? And I'll ask Darren to say something about this. The problem with it, and this was exposed by the consultation, was it was never the case that this was not going. It was just sort of about moving people from one part of the station to another, which was kind of how it was suggested to us. It was only a case of moving people from out of the glass. It became clear, particularly in respect of Northern, Transport Focus in correspondence with Northern established that it would lead to a huge loss of staffing presence, with some stations in the north of England with no presence at all, no human presence on the station at any part of the day. So clearly, I don't believe the proposals were what they were suggested. However, to move more positively, I don't think we should be in the business of saying we're not open to different ways of thinking. I think, Darren, I'll hand over to you at this point. I think as a committee, I think need some innovative thinking on stations to be done, both in respect of the accessibility issues that I've just been speaking about, but also in respect of the service standards, the way in which we can use stations to greater effect and bring more benefit to communities and to residents. And if we can have a commitment to maintain the staffing levels, I think we could see some people being moved out, but it doesn't mean you have to close the ticket office for those who prefer to use a ticket office. But I think what it points to is a more devolved future for rail stations, so that the possibilities can be fully realised. In our case, Transport for Greater Manchester could play a role in terms of we could support some of the activity that goes on within stations. So over to you, really, Darren, to suggest some ways in which we might take some of this thinking further. But I think the ticket offices and the accessibility issues need to be part of a station improvement sort of vision for the north of England going forward.
Thank you, Chair. And absolutely, I think you've covered much of what I was looking to say anyway. I mean, it not through coincidence that we had accessibility first and then moving on to onto this item, because as you say, they are sort of inextricably linked together in terms of what happens in the future. Just on the Transport Focus point, David Sidebottom did reach out to me over the last few days to say that he entirely endorsed our submission, on this to the Secretary of State, and was very keen to work with us, because he felt that, having read these papers, that we were very much on the right lines. And in very brief terms, Transport Focus identified 9 key areas, of concern which they set out in their response, and we've looked to try and sort of respond on those similar points. I think that the two outcomes here really were, obviously, first of all, we welcome the withdrawal of the proposal. It's important that we sort of made that re-emphasised. But then moving forward, it's how do we take this forward? And I think there are two particular elements to this. First of all, we are suggesting in the paper that we work closely with Northern and TPE in particular, particularly around looking to expand on the stations as a place concept, and certainly from initial discussions that we've had with colleagues in the train operating companies, they were very, very keen to do that. And I've already suggested, that we might look at some pilot locations and the like. So if we were minded to go down that route, I think that we will be pushing very much at an open door. The second point to raise, though, and it's one that I think, Chair, I've touched on with you previously, is a concern that matters aren't allowed to sort of wither here, in terms of the risk of losing staff on stations, because of uncertainty. And there's been a number of instances, over the recent weeks and months where ticket offices have been closed because of lack of staff. So one of the things that I would propose to do would be, as part of our monthly dashboard, to collect and record staffing at stations across the north, so that we have that, and that we are ensuring that what is meant to happen with station ticket officers is indeed happening, and that there's not some withering away of this as a consequence of lack of recruitment. So we're looking at a twin track approach there, but I think in many ways you've covered most of the key issues that we wanted to touch on in any event.
Well, thanks very much, Darren. I can see a couple of colleagues indicating. So Susan, Steve, and then Mark. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, good news that this proposal has been withdrawn. So good to see this on the agenda in a positive way today. Just two things I wanted to clarify. Firstly, when you mentioned about staffing, last time we had this meeting, some of the operators said they were actually holding back vacancies pending this decision. So can we have some assurances that those vacancies are now being released, because that might help with the staffing issues that you've just been referring to there, Darren. It could be that they were understaffed for a number of months now pending this decision. Now the decision's been made not to close, they should be staffed up again. So how quickly can that happen? That'd be one thing. I think the other thing is, obviously this cut was as a result of government cuts to the operators, wasn't it? And I want to make sure that this money is being put back in and they're not being asked to make a cut onto other services that might pop up somewhere else that we don't know about. Thank you.
Yeah, so just
Really,
come back on,
Darren, if you could come back at the end, if that's okay, just in interest of managing our time. Sorry about that, but we'll probably just make the meeting run a little better. So Steve and then Mark.
Yeah, just to say, and I've got a meeting like you should have. I know you're probably staying on this with Michael Gove in a few minutes. But look, you've mentioned a few of the groups who were really active in ensuring that we were successful in this campaign. The trade unions played the blinder. The Daily Mirror supported really, really well. But I just have to say that, you need a bit of credit yourself on this for taking the political lead. I remember the early discussions, and not everybody was absolutely certain that we should be going down the road of a legal challenge. And that was something that yourself and Greater Manchester headed up. It was the right thing to do, obviously, because we've got to the right result. But I think that set the tone of things. And often people think that, all politicians are the same and all that sort of stuff. Well, they're not. And you can actually do some good things in politics. I think this is one of the outcomes that we should be proud of.
Oh, I appreciate that, Steve, and thanks for all the support that everyone provided. I think, like with issues of disability access, the ticket offices just raise fundamental issues, and I think it's really important. And when we see those issues like that we do operate in a sort of very clear and direct way. And we did on the issue. And thanks for what you said, Steve. Appreciate it. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. The main driver behind the ticket office closures seems to be kind of making efficiencies. So if they're not being made in this way, I just wonder where these efficiencies are going to actually be made, assuming that the train operating companies included these as part of their business plans.
Thank you, Mark. In many ways, Darren, that touches on a similar issue that Susan Hinchcliffe was making. I think for actually to answer, I think it touches back on pretty much everything we've discussed so far, the kind of notion that the railways need to be in some form of managed decline and that there's no money in them and, everything has to be shrunk back. You can run public transport in that way, but you end up in a self-fulfilling sort of downward spiral if you do that, because then more people lose trust, the more people don't travel, and then you just end up in a sort of you do end up in managed decline. I mean, what we've got to get to here, surely, is the opposite, isn't it? Where more people are using the railways because they trust them and can access them, and they feel confident in doing so, and therefore more money's coming in. And we've got growth on the railways in the north, haven't we? And we must resist this kind of narrative that says, oh, everything can't be afforded and everything goes into decline. How can something as simple as a ticket office not be afforded when people here in this country are paying the highest prices for rail ticket prices of anywhere I think, in Europe. So, we've really got to, I think, kind of resist this idea that everything has to be pared back. But Darren, over to you, really, just to give us the assurances I think that Mark and Susan are looking for, that we're not going to see some other action taken here, such as guards on trains rearing its head again as an issue.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Chair. And just to go back to that point about growth in passenger numbers, I did double check this again before the session today, because the growth that we see across the north, we don't talk about this enough. I don't think that it is happening. And I checked the numbers, and the level of growth. If you take Liverpool as an example, it's 140% of what it was pre-COVID. It's by far and away the most impressive recovery of anything. And across the north, we're still way ahead in our major stations compared to the major stations in London. So I think it's a point that we do need to keep reminding ourselves of. But going back to the specific questions, I think the first one around staffing, that which was raised by Leader Hinchcliffe, that's why I'm so keen that we look to record staffing levels, and also we'll look to be recording, available posts. So we will look to capture all of this, and I think that we'll have that on our dashboard for next month. I have some draft numbers for this month, which I chose not to include to members because I wasn't quite happy about the veracity of them. But I will assure this group that we will have that, so that we see the whole picture on staffing levels and where the recruitment is going. Moving on to the knottier issue of funding, and I think it's a very important point that's been raised here by a couple of members. I think it's fair to say that yes, this appears to be very much a cost reduction measure that was put to the train operating companies. Where we are now, of course, is that cut hasn't taken place. There isn't a cut, so there's not a reduction. There's not in inverted commas, saving for next year. Now, I think this is one that the Rail North Committee will need to keep monitoring over the next 12 months or so, because, of course, the status quo remains the same for 2024. There's not been a saving, but there's not been the adverse impact either. But while nothing has been said to officers, there does remain that concern that cost-cutting measures might be looked for elsewhere. We're not aware of that, but it's one that we need to keep very alive to. And so we'll keep monitoring that, and if anything of that nature was to resurface, then of course we would come straight back to you, Chair, and to this committee, with anything of that nature.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. Thank you, Mark, because you're right to make sure we've got an eye on that particular issue. Darren, I wonder, to conclude this discussion, whether or not you and the team, David Hogarth and the team, could really give us chapter and verse on the growth that we've seen on the North's railways. People often talk about the leisure market, and I see evidence of that here in Greater Manchester. The weekend usage is seems to me much higher than it used to be. And I wonder if we could capture that growth story so that we're not in a position where we're seeing some of that revenue growth in the North then just being swept back into a general treasury pot and not kept in the railways. I think, the committee understanding that growth story more, I think, would be helpful to us in understanding what revenue is coming into the North's railways and what then is a fair use of that revenue. So if that is, you're nodding, is that something you feel you could do?
We could, and maybe I'll present at the next RNC, and then possibly we maybe then look to do a quarterly update on that, so that we have that, so that members get to see that as we go through 2024 and beyond.
Excellent. Look forward to it. Thank you, Darren. Tim?
Thanks, Andy. I just want to reinforce the point that I think the best way of making our stations attractive, safe and accessible is really by fully integrating them with the local communities. So I really look forward to work to see how we can take this forward in innovative ways.
I agree, Tim. I think, track and signalling is clearly national rail infrastructure. Station building and the facilities therein is local fabric, isn't it? It's local infrastructure. And I think as part of our work on accessibility and touching on this issue of ticket offices, I think we need to get to stations in places. What did you call it, Darren, before? Stations as part of place, or
stations as a place.
Stations as a place. I mean, I think we need to start to say that beyond the areas with devolved arrangements as well, in every local authority represented on this call, there should be an opportunity to pilot devolved station management so that councils can start to work with colleagues in the private sector, voluntary and community sector, to say, right, well, if we had control of this facility, what more could we do with it than is currently being done with it? And I just think that's the type of new thinking we need to bring to this, and it shouldn't be restricted to the areas with a combined authority and a devolution deal. I don't see any reason why every council shouldn't be offered that opportunity. Good. Okay. Thank you, Darren, and we look forward to the growth report in due course. So we're going to move on now, colleagues, to item 6, East Coast Main Line, December 2024 timetable. This is an issue that I know is of considerable concern to colleagues on the east of the Pennines, particularly in the northeast region. And we've had, I think, a letter from the Minister in the last hour, which I think is important that we recognise, and the kind of main parts of that to be sort of minuted as part of our discussion. But if I to get us going, if I ask, is it David? Is it David Hogarth,
yes,
to sort of lead us off? I think we've got Simon Lashome from Network Rail with us, and Rob Warnes from Northern with us as well. He might want to input into this discussion. But it's obviously getting close now to finalising the arrangements for December 24. So I think we've got to be really clear-eyed, everybody, today, and articulate what is the minimum that this committee expects to see in place for that timetable, because probably this is our last window, I would imagine, at this committee anyway, to influence what is about to be agreed. So with that, David, if I pause there and hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to suggest that we move quite quickly to hear from the industry reps, and then perhaps we invite Martin Tugwell just to talk a little bit about the ministerial letter before the committee has a chance to discuss it. I'll just say that the reason you're being consulted today is because this impacts on Northern and Transpennine services, obviously impacts on others as well, but through the Rail North Partnership, this is collecting the committee's view. The fundamental issue here is what we've seen elsewhere on the network, that there isn't enough capacity for all the services. This is particularly the case north of York, where as a minimum we need 7, ideally 8 or more paths per hour for long distance services. There are only 6 available. That means there have to be compromises. And the fundamental issue from our point of view is one of those areas of compromise is the Transpennine service that used to be 2 trains an hour from Newcastle across to Manchester, and it's been reduced during COVID, but this proposal would mean there'd be several years where it had to remain at 1 train per hour. Of course, there are other benefits to the timetable proposal, and I think probably at this point I'll hand over to Simon Lashome, who's the industry director lead, just to update the committee. I think you've got a couple of slides, Simon.
Thanks, David. I'll share this short slide deck, and I'm also joined by colleagues from Transpennine Express, Northern, LNER and Arriva Cross Country, and Rob Warnes will follow me to present his perspective. So we'll keep any questions to the end. This first slide states that the specification has been approved by the Secretary of State, and it does deliver additional revenue. We talked about the growth in leisure travel, And that
Simon,
gives us an opportunity.
My apologies for interrupting you, Simon. It's quite a detailed slide. Would you put it on full screen for colleagues?
Oh,
please?
I apologise. Sorry.
No problem at all. That's...
Just loading.
That's much better. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Sorry. So as I was saying, this timetable does take advantage of certainly the growth in the leisure travel and enables, we think, investment in the new services that we built into the specification and builds the case for improving that east-west connectivity that we all want to get that seventh high-speed path between York and Newcastle. It balances the need to grow that industry revenue, but it also reflects that what can be planned and delivered within the subsidy. And the industry sees this timetable as the starting point to include both the current and future aspirations for the blueprint for the East Coast Main Line. So we've listed here some of the services in addition to the LNER Newcastle that has been accommodated within the timetable. And we're aware that these regional services really are required and need to be delivered. And so the specification is built if the funding and resources are committed to include these new services. The next slide just states that we're not dependent on any additional infrastructure for this timetable specification. Everything that's required is in place. And on the left-hand side, we're showing really what that this timetable is the basis for the rail industry's planning to deliver all these additional enhancements on the East Coast Main Line. So as a planning assumption, we've used this timetable to be able to build the case for all of these investments. On the right-hand side, we've got the programmes in development, and we have two specific ones that are in the industry rail plan in terms of including that capacity seventh path, which is at the outline business case stage and ready for a decision to be taken to undertake the detailed design in the new year. And also faster trains and more capacity into Leeds is also being developed. And we've captured all of those proposals within this slide. And as I say, this timetable is used for the industry to be the basis of developing those business cases for that future investment and capability growth. So the next steps, as rightly said by David, we've been unable to accommodate all of the timetable services within specification. And so we've had to have trade-off. But the plan does look to address that capacity through the integrated rail plan scheme. And whilst cross-country are currently operating a reduced service, we will see the increase in that frequency in 2025. The dependencies that the industry are facing, clearly the annual business planning process that confirms the subsidy to cover the train operating costs needs to be endorsed. The industry wants a reliable timetable. We're testing that right now. And also timely decision making so that the rail industry is ready to deliver a timetable if it's the enhanced proposition. So the milestones that we're facing are we get the results from the modelling this month, and that's important for us to test the reliability. And then the timetable process the industry has to follow is that the train operators will confirm their intention to bid this month. And we're told consistently by the operators that they will be bidding for this new timetable. And therefore, we as Network Rail and the industry need to really know this month that this is the timetable that the industry wishes to do a baseline for the industry to bid to in February next year. Clearly, if we're unable to deliver this timetable, those service uplifts within the timetable specification for both LNER and Northern will be delayed until further notice. And it doesn't guarantee that TransPennine Express will immediately return to 2 trains per hour between Newcastle and Manchester because of both the capacity constraints we mentioned, but also the upcoming planned disruption to deliver the TransPennine route upgrade, which does limit the ability to run the level of capacity that currently operates. So that's just a a few words from me on behalf of the industry. I'd like to just hand over to Rob from Northern, who will just present his perspective. Rob.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to present Northern's views on this. We've watched with interest some of the debates that have been focused very much on a long-distance path between Newcastle across the Pennines into Manchester and Bosley Loop Hall, but thought it'd be worth just bringing to the committee's attention that this timetable is about much more than some long-distance paths, and that for Northern this timetable facilitates new hourly services between Middlesbrough, Newcastle and Sheffield and Leeds. It also improves the Harrogate line services, and it also improves performance, particularly around Newcastle. Without this revised structure, we will struggle to solve some of the significant crowding challenges that we already have. We've talked previously before this item about the growth that the North is experiencing. On these two particular corridors, we are experiencing significant growth. And particularly places like Hartlepool, the hourly service that runs today is leaving people behind on regular occasions. And you look at the fast services between Sheffield and Leeds, where cross-country services are rammed with a lot of people standing. So this gives us an opportunity to start addressing some of those really, really busy corridors. And although there is no commitment from government to fully fund these at the moment, we will work with Rail North Partnership and local authorities to create the business case and create the funding package. And we believe that some of these will almost stand on their own because of the additional revenue that they will bring. Although we recognise that the timetable may not fully deliver what TfN ambition is for the North, we believe this is a step in the right direction. And with a pipeline of investment in infrastructure, that ambition can be realised over time. Passengers already have multiple services between Newcastle and York and between Newcastle and Leeds. But our customers at Hartlepool only have that hourly service. They have no alternative but to go back in the car or try and find a bus. So my request to the committee is to think wider than just Newcastle to Manchester and consider the needs of today's and future passengers on Teesside, in Hartlepool, and those travelling between Yorkshire's two biggest cities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Simon. David, do you want to come back in before I go to Martin Gannon?
I think if we can just bring in Martin Tugwell, if that's okay, Chair, just to talk about the discussions that he and the TfN Chair have had with the Minister.
Yes, and the Minister's letter. Thank you, David. Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Yes, it's just to say that myself and the TfN Chair, Lord McLaughlin, met with the Rail Minister last Tuesday, and knowing that the concerns of partners in the North on the East Coast Mainline timetable, we raised those issues with the Minister. What you have before you as a letter that we received this morning is the Minister's response. I think there are 4 items in there that you will see. One is actually just picking up and reflecting on the point that Simon has made in his introduction there about the infrastructure on the East Coast Mainline north of York. You've seen and heard from Simon that work is at the stage of OBC and SOBC. It's in the pipeline, so it's not one where we're having to make the case for investment in the pipeline. It is in the pipeline, and subject to that work being completed, will go into delivery. The second point that the Minister responds to is recognising the importance given by the North to increasing services in line with what Rob's referred to there about how this is about investing in growth. And you'll see from the Minister that he recognises that and the importance of having that increase in connectivity and growth of rail services as part of the long-term strategy for Network North. There is also the third point about the recognition, which I think is significant here, about the need to provide that enhanced service between Newcastle and Manchester. As colleagues have already touched on, we are going to have a period over the next 2 or 3 years where the route between across the Pennines is going to be subject to quite a bit of delay as we have the prospect of the billions of pounds being invested in the Trans-Pennine route upgrade. But there's a very clear statement on the letter from the Minister about the importance of enhancing that through service from Newcastle across to Manchester. And the fourth point, which I think again is actually significant, is a recognition that we need to strengthen the working and make sure, as you've touched on already, colleagues, at this meeting, about having an even stronger voice for the North, feeding into some of these processes. And I think there's an opportunity there for us to pursue that further in terms of some of the industry processes. So Chair, you've got that letter there. It is in response to the conversation that myself and Lord McLaughlin had with the Minister, and I think it kind of builds on and reflects some of what you've heard from Simon and Rob, but it's for the committee now to take a view about how they wish to respond.
Thanks very much indeed, Martin. Rob, I can see your hand's gone back up, but I was keen to move to members' comments. Is it a short contribution?
No, sorry, it shouldn't be up.
So, Martin, obviously these proposals have a huge bearing on the northeast of England. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. I mean, so as first and foremost, I hear the representations made by the industry and recognise them and acknowledge them. I think let's be absolutely blunt about it. Having an additional hourly service from Newcastle, London, and the benefits not just to the north, to Newcastle. I mean, I live 2 miles away from Newcastle city centre, and the central station would be great for me. Okay, but it's good for the entire country. It's good for the national economy in terms of that additional service. But the issue goes back to the issue that we had in 2021. Okay, that it was catastrophic and demonstrated critically the constraint issues on the East Coast Main Line. The fact that we could only have 6 slots an hour, and it critically demonstrated that issue. I mean, the prospect of sort of express trains, local trains, cross-Pennine trains, and freight trains running on the same line meant that there was the necessity to cut back on the number of stops at important stations across the whole of the northeast of England. Berwick, Darlington. Remember Darlington, the home of the railway. With Treasury North moving to the northeast of England as a major economic driver, and the prospect of thousands of civil servants standing at Darlington station watching the trains go by because they didn't stop. This is just absolutely catastrophic. Now, the issue for me in the northeast of England, our perspective, remains exactly the same. Now, I've read the Rail Minister's letter this morning. I've only received it this morning. I probably read it about 20 minutes ago. And I am reassured. Okay, I mean, there's a firm commitment there that these things will be examined positively. However, forgive my cynicism, I've heard these assurances in the past, and there was assurances given in the northwest about infrastructure investment that would be made prior to the implementation of a disastrous timetable change, and those things just didn't happen. So, from the northeast of England, I would hope from Transport for the North, the position remains the same. We need firm assurances. I hear that there are proposals to, increase the capacity on the existing East Coast Main Line. That there are engineering interventions that can be made. Now, I assume that's whatever laybys at the side, so slow trains can get out of the way of fast trains, or whether you're going to sort of like hover them 20 foot in the air while the trains run underneath them. But what I need to see is the details of that. Okay, and that's what, and I'm being told that some of this has been shared with officers in the north, but subject to non-disclosure agreements. Well, I'm sorry, I represent residents in the northeast of England. Okay, and the implications of this timetable change are, to put it lightly, significant, and therefore we need to see those details. Okay, so what I'm looking for as minimum is that we need to see the details of those engineering interventions. We need to see the timetable for their implementation, that they are costed and that they are funded, and that they will be implemented before the timetable changes are made. Not implemented, but at least we have the guarantee that they're going to be completed.
Well, that's very clear, Martin. Thank you very much. And we will come back to all of those points that you've just made. I'm just pausing to see if there's any other members of the committee who want to come in on this item. Councillor Hinchcliffe, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's difficult, isn't it, this? Because there's lots of us who are dependent on it, and it's quite difficult making it all fit. So there are some real positives in here from my point of view, of course. The Bradford Foster Square services to London is really good, and I really want those, obviously, in time for 2025. The Sheffield to Leeds service, although I'd like a guarantee and make sure it's a fast train as well. So again, that's sort of a yes, but from our point of view, that Sheffield Leeds, and that investment in East Coast Main Line does need to happen, and we do need a firm timetable of what's going to happen when with that. And my understanding is that some of these services that are additional, like the Bradford service, for example, that will make a profit. So those profits should therefore be reinvested into the network to make sure that other services can also be introduced and run. So has that business case properly been done for the whole of the network to show we can team and ladle some of the profits to sustain some of the other routes which might not be as firm at the moment. And I think from what Martin said, I absolutely agree, really. We have private conversations on a regular basis, really, if there's commercially confidential items on the agenda. And I'm sure, we've always been trusted to have those. And I'm sure we can be trusted to have that conversation about what upgrades will happen when, and have further conversations regarding that. And I suppose from our point of view, this is not ideal, but it's a yes, but rather than a no. Yeah. But so it's like, what else can we improve from this? Realising that the timetable needs to change because it can't be as it is forever. What else can we improve to get it properly over the line and make sure that most people benefit? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Andy. I'm representing the Tees Valley, and mainly to echo what Martin has said, reflecting on the fact that the work that's currently happening at Darlington Railway Station to improve capacity was actually originally done with the assumption that HS2 would reach the northeast. So, like Martin, I'm sitting here thinking there's lots of promises of infrastructure changes being made that will improve capacity, but we've already learnt the lessons that promises have been made in the past and things haven't happened. I think the Tees Valley position is that in terms of what's proposed at the moment, it's the best of a bad job. We accept where we are in terms of what the capacity is today. But like Martin and Susan, I am worried about what will happen in the coming future with regards infrastructure changes are required to improve capacity, and that we're not going to face the same situation in a year's time when we're looking at the December 25 timetable, that there's been no improvements. Because, again, just to repeat Martin, it's not just for the benefit of people living in the northeast, it's about the economic capacity of the country as a whole. People need to travel from the northeast, but equally people need to travel to the northeast. It isn't just an issue for the northeast, so we really need to make clear that the infrastructure changes that are promised in the future do come about. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here again bemoaning the fact that the services to the northeast just aren't good enough.
Well, it's a very fair point, and obviously we've been through this experience over this side of the Pennines where reductions were made to a timetable a couple of years ago, and requests were made that the infrastructure is put in to go back to the full timetable, and obviously that hasn't happened as of yet. So I fully support what colleagues in the northeast are saying. You should have access to those interventions, as you say, Martin, and you should have a timetable for them. And additionally, I appreciate the Minister's commitment today, but if there is to be the benefits of this change to be realised, well, let's have those benefits then. Let's have a commitment to that service between Middlesbrough and Newcastle, and let's have a commitment to that service between Leeds and Sheffield. I know Oliver Coppard, Mayor Coppard, wanted to make that point, but has had to drop off. But, let's not just have the benefits sort of vaguely thrown in, let's have them absolutely realised, and let's have a commitment to when those services will be funded. I realise that's for the government rather than any colleague on this call, but I don't think we should just have vague promises dangled in front of us. I think we should have, for difficult pain that we have to take. Well, let's have the benefits realised as quickly as we can. Tim Mitchell, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. It's obviously incredibly complicated to do a timetable of this magnitude, and it's now impossible to please everybody in every part of the region. I would just like to hope that we can take a region-wide approach to this and consider some regions such as the South Humber area where this timetable will give us our only daily service, intercity service, and we've not had such a service for many years. So I would support the timetable change on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. So I can't see any more hands, and I think we probably are moving to the summing up. I think Susan's, our Vice Chair's description of this as a yes, but is kind of where people are. What I would say to the industry is, can you help us remove the but? And obviously you've had a kind of clear ask here for the funding of new services that are made possible by this timetable, but that obviously would have to go to the Minister, but hopefully with industry support, with the business case to support it. And then secondly, the interventions that Martin said are being discussed, but presumably not shared with TfN to this point, because any changes to timetable without clarity about when the rest of the infrastructure goes in are really not right. They're not fair to members where those effects are felt. So there needs to be absolute clarity on that. So those, Martin, you've got your hand up. Those are the two big provisos, I think, that have been put on the table here this morning. Can you help us here in terms of how we make sure that our voice is heard?
Well, try, Chair. Like you say, I think you're summing up. There's a very clear yes, but, and I think Councillor Gannon was quite clear what the but was in terms of clarity. So my proposal, Chair, if it's okay with the committee, is you task us to take those away, to work with the industry as quickly as possible to be able to provide reassurance. I would just make the observation we do have a full board meeting on the 14th of December, so there would be that would probably be the easiest way to kind of bring it back and accountability back to yourselves as as a political leadership, if people are comfortable with that.
Yes, I think so. Can't see anyone. Martin, I think you're indicating that you support that. Susan too. I think there needs to be a letter, Martin, summarising what's been discussed here. To be sent quickly, really, to ask to say what further assurances are needed around infrastructure. And picking up Rob Bourne's point, there is overcrowding on the railways in these areas, so the business case should be easy to stand up for these additional services. And I think we need, as I say, we need to move to a different position, really, where benefits are long promised and cuts come in quick. What we need to get to here is that we realise benefits on the railways more quickly, and I think that's the call that should be in this letter.
Chair, if we work with you on the wording of that letter before the end of the week, so that it's a response back after the conversation, and if we work with you, then you can be the kind of we can be reassured that we've captured the points raised by the committee today.
Yeah, and I'm just in thanking industry colleagues for presenting today and the work that you've done, and clearly there's lots to welcome in this proposal, things that will take us forward. I think it would be good on this particular issue if we could get to a point where everyone has agreed and there's no lingering that the but isn't being answered and it's just left to sort of, I don't know, not be answered. I think it would be a really good thing if we could conclude this fully in December and say, right, everyone's compromised, everyone's got a bit of benefit and been heard. I just think it would be a good place to get to, and maybe we should reply to the Minister to that effect, Martin, on the back of this discussion.
Will do, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
That's a constructive discussion, and hope, Martin, we will absolutely keep you fully involved as we as Martin Gannon as we go forward on this, and colleagues in the North East. I am going to defer item 7, colleagues, to the end of the agenda today, the infrastructure item because we have colleagues from operators who I think are only available at this particular time slot. So if I could take item 8 at this point, and welcome to the meeting Andy Mellors from Avanti West Coast. I think we have Tricia Williams with us from Northern, and George Thomas from Trans-Pennine Trains. Have we got everybody with us? If I may then, just to set up this part of our discussion, obviously we want to hear from all operators, particularly. There has been obviously some improvements, notable improvements on Trans-Pennine Trains in recent times, but a drop-off more recently, and I think that's the same for Northern as well. Obviously, we've been through the half-term period, we've had adverse weather, but we've got to get away from a world where you can't have decent rail services all the time, which is what they really should be. We're still in a world where things fluctuate too much, and we need to just hear from the operators, our two main Northern operators this morning, as to why that is. But I've also asked Avanti West Coast to come to the committee today, because obviously we've had what to us was the surprise announcement of a reduction in the December timetable between London and Manchester. And this is not a trivial matter, given the importance of December in our city with regard to the Christmas markets and all of the footfall that brings. There are lots of people looking to visit our city at this moment in time. There are lots of people looking to make plans for Christmas, and obviously the loss of train capacity limits that ability, but also puts huge pressure on the other services that are running. Beyond that, there are ongoing concerns about the performance of Avanti West Coast, and those concerns to this point have not been satisfactorily addressed, to the point where members of the committee, or certainly speaking from my perspective, and I think for Mayor Rotherham as well, who's had to drop off, where we have confidence in this service, we still don't, I'm afraid. So it's a challenging introduction, Andy, but I'm just voicing how our residents and our passengers feel. The service is not where it should be at the moment, and this timetable reduction in December kind of further undermines that confidence. So it's a difficult one, but we need to work with you until we have that reliable rail service on what I would call the country's most important railway line, if not the most important, certainly in the top one or two. So over to you, Andy, but I'd be grateful if you could take us through a very clear explanation as to why we've had to see a timetable reduction this year, having thought we got through all of that stuff from the summer of last year.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon. Andy Mellors here, Managing Director of Avanti West Coast. I understand I've got 5 minutes to give you a short overview, focusing on current service provision, including those December withdrawals, but also give you an assurance as to how we're working hard to deliver sustained good performance and indeed support growth across the north and our wider network. So happy to answer questions after that. So I was appointed into this role in March of this year, having initially supported Avanti as part of the wider recovery plan, which was implemented after the challenges of summer 2022. And that allowed us to build back the timetable from December of last year, including the restoration of the 3 trains per hour on the Manchester route. So that recovery plan is working and delivering significant measurable improvements in performance and helping to rebuild trust and confidence of customers and communities. Key actions that we took then and we continue to take now: improving train crew availability, so expediting drivers through training, tackling structural issues in our rostering to make sure that resources align to service requirements, and reduce reliance on overtime working. So we've got a driver workforce where around a third of our drivers are over 55 years of age. So we're having to recruit in unprecedented numbers, with around 70 driver trainees every year for the next few years. We've already introduced over 100 new drivers into productivity, and those efforts continue unabated, and that includes an award-winning campaign to increase gender diversity in the driving grade as well. But notwithstanding all of that, we do still have some challenges which I'll come on to. So in terms of where we've been over the last 6 months, I'd just point to the Office of Rail and Road statistics published a couple of months ago that showed Avanti as one of the most improved operators for the so-called TOC on self cancellations, the cancellations that are within our direct control, so typically train crew and fleet related issues. But there's certainly room for improvement on punctuality, and the last few weeks and months have been quite challenging, particularly with infrastructure disruption and weather disruption, and we're working really hard with Network Rail to address those issues and make sure that we learn lessons from significant recent incidents. Transport Focus published a survey back in September that showed Avanti as the most improved operator for customer satisfaction over the 6 months from March through to August, and actually getting customer satisfaction back to levels that were the case before the timetable challenges of summer 2022. So more recently, over the last 3 weekends, Avanti, along with other operators in and out of Euston, have had to operate an amended timetable at weekends because of reduced capacity with engineering work, and that does necessitate thinning the Manchester service from 3 to 2 trains per hour. But those changes are published in advance. We are now back to industry train planning timescales. But for the next 3 weekends, there isn't any engineering work, so our normal timetable will apply. But beyond that, we have got some residual crew availability issues caused by some historic leave agreements that predate our recovery plan. So unfortunately, it has been necessary to announce a temporary amended timetable in the weeks running up to Christmas. But the objective of that is to provide a more reliable service with the advertised timetable and reduce the need for unplanned, late notice, less predictable cancellations, which we recognise that customers cite as their number one frustration. So those changes which we've announced are in weeks commencing the 11th and the 18th of December, where we've looked carefully at our anticipated resource availability position and looked to develop a timetable that we have confidence in our ability to resource. None of the trains that have come out of the timetable had gone on sale, so we haven't got a position where customers have booked onto those services. And we will prioritise deployment of our 11-car Pendolino fleet on the Manchester route, which has all now been refurbished, which includes additional standard class capacity on those trains as well. So in terms of the legacy leave agreements, which I mentioned, we're working with employee representatives to get a better spread of leave throughout the year. Those negotiations are ongoing with the intent of securing revised annual leave rosters to commence in January next year. So although there are challenges ahead, there's also plenty to look forward to. I've mentioned the refurbishment of the Pendolino fleet already, but we've also got our new Hitachi fleet, which has started to be used for driver manager training shortly, with driver training to commence. And that fleet will increase capacity, allow some service uplifts, and also, with it being a bi-mode fleet, improve our sustainability credentials as well. So we want to grow and deliver a better railway. That's a shared aspiration that we hold, recognising that there is this post-pandemic challenge with changes to travel patterns, the wider industry financial challenges, and the need to be responsible with taxpayers' money. So we're being innovative in what we're doing with our customer proposition, and I'd point to Superfare, which is our promotion that allows customers who have flexible travel patterns to book excellent value fares, starting at £15 London to Liverpool, £20 London to Manchester. And we're also working with authorities and communities across the region to deliver local improvements as well. So we do face some critical choices going forwards, but we're committed to doing what works best for customers and the taxpayers. We welcome the recent development with the RMT putting out the rail delivery group offer out for referendum. And we've really got to continue on that journey of restoring trust and confidence with customers and stakeholders, clawing back some of that revenue which has still not been recovered post-pandemic, and setting up our business as part of the wider industry to support economic growth and deliver further environmental benefits. So happy at that to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy, and thank you for coming to address the committee at short notice this morning. We appreciate that. I'm opening the floor, colleagues, to see if anyone wants to come in on this item. I mean, personally, I said at the start, Andy, I don't see how this railway can be provided on the basis that it is currently being provided, where people don't know how many trains will be running from one month of the year to the next. We've got to move this railway to a different place in 2024 than it's been in 2022 and 2023. And I hear some of what you say about improvements, but my team tell me that only a quarter of Manchester-London trains arrive on time, and that isn't good enough. Now, I realise some of that may be outside of your control, and maybe significantly outside of your control, but some of it is within your control, and that just isn't a good enough service standard for the railway that, as I say, is critical to the country's economy. It needs to be better. A direct question I've got for you. You mentioned recruiting 100 more drivers. How many drivers do you currently have? Number one. And then number two, how many do you need so that we never get these issues with the timetable recurring in 2024?
Yeah, so the 100 that I referred to, Chair, that is the number of drivers that we've already put through training or returned to productivity since the pandemic. At any point in time, we've got about 80 trainee drivers in the pipeline, which constitute a mix of new entrants into the driving grade, but also drivers that may have joined our business from elsewhere. So at the moment, we've got over 600 drivers on our books at various stages, ranging from qualified through to trainees. And at any point in time, we need just under 200 to run the service on a daily basis. In terms of our productive pool of drivers at the moment, that's at around the 500 mark, with the balance being those that are going through training.
And the second part of the question, Andy, how many do you need to have a full complement so that we don't see a recurrence of these timetable issues?
Well, I think the number that we have with those additional drivers that are part of that 600 that are coming through training will get us to a sustainable position to deliver not just the current timetable, but also some timetable uplifts into next year. A key issue here is about the availability of those drivers from a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, which is why the work that we did last December continued with that in May with the timetable change, and we've got another timetable change in December, is making sure that our rosters are fit for purpose in terms of having the right resource in the right place at the right time. We had some challenges which last summer, and the reduction in rest day working exposed, that we didn't necessarily have rosters that spread our people across the working week, so service reliability challenges at or around the weekend. We've got the similar issue with annual leave not being spread as evenly as we'd like across the year. So we've worked really hard when we've had the opportunity to do a roster change aligned to a timetable, where we've got the opportunity to renegotiate annual leave arrangements, which reset every January. We're taking those opportunities to ensure that the productive drivers that we do have on the books, of which we continue to increase the numbers week by week, are actually in the right place at the right time to deliver a consistent service for our customers throughout the week and throughout the year.
So we won't see a repeat of this in 2024? Is that what you're telling the committee?
we're working really, really hard to avoid a repeat of that. So I very much hope that the aggregate impact of all the initiatives that we're taking will, significantly improve our position and reduce the likelihood that this sort of temporary change would have to be made going forwards. But there is, an industrial relations headwind at the moment. I've given a nod to recent developments with the RMT, but what I can assure you, Chair, and the committee is that we're working really hard to reduce the risk of this sort of thing happen in the future.
Forgive me if I don't find that entirely convincing, in that you can't say that there won't be a repeat of these kind of reductions next year. We heard last year from Avanti that the industrial relations situation wouldn't apply anymore because enough drivers would be recruited, so that there weren't the issues with rest day working. It sounds like you're not close to that position, that you still could be affected by issues related to rest day working.
Well, we are significantly less reliant on rest day working now than the business was 12 or 18 months ago. We still have a level of rest day working, largely associated with training activities that need to go on, where there are changes made to bits of the infrastructure, and we have to rebrief our drivers on those changes. So we are working hard to increase the number of productive drivers and make sure that our rosters and our leave arrangements are fit for purpose. So we want to get to a point where we have resilience throughout the week, throughout the year. And, the negotiations that are going on at the moment for next year's leave rosters, coupled to the continued efforts on driver training, will get us to a point where we have, all year round reliability.
Okay. Colleagues, I can't see any other hands. I'll just finish off on a couple of questions. The Mayor of Liverpool City Region, Steve Rotherham, can't be here. He's at a meeting with the Secretary of State, but he said when the change was made, when we moved to Avanti from Virgin, there was a commitment to have 2 trains per hour from Liverpool. You mentioned improvements, Andy. Can you say anything about when that timetable will be delivered?
Yes, Chair. I'm actually in the Mayor's offices in Liverpool at the moment, actually having met with his team this morning, talking about how we promote Liverpool and the wider Merseyside region as a destination. So we have, I mentioned our Hitachi trains. We have those trains on order. The first ones of them are being delivered. The final trains in that order, which are due to be delivered later this year, into next year, will actually support an uplift of the Liverpool service to the 2 trains per hour that was the aspiration from a number of years ago. So we have been working very closely with Mayor Rotherham's team to prioritise which of the additional services should be introduced first, and it's our intention to start and operate some of those services from the June 2024 timetable change.
I'm sure that'd be welcome news for colleagues in Liverpool, so thank you for that, Andy. Lord McLaughlin, Patrick. On mute, Patrick.
Sorry, if I can just ask a couple of points. When will the Hitachi trains actually come into passenger operation? And the other point is, when did you? I think one of the annoying things about the announcements around Christmas time, the reduction of service, is a very short notice that's been given as to those particular changes. So when did it first become apparent to you were going to have to make these changes? And is there anything you can do in future times to, if you have got to do these things, is to give a bit more notice to travelling passengers and to the regions?
Yeah, thank you. So taking the first bit of the question in terms of the Hitachi trains, we've currently accepted 3 of those trains from Hitachi, which are being used for the initial driver manager training. We are still going through negotiations with the trade unions over finalising the training arrangements that will apply to those trains. So those discussions are literally, ongoing as we speak. So as soon as we have a conclusion to those discussions, we'll be able to commence training, and our expectation is in the new year that we will start and undertake that in earnest with the initial introduction of the trains sometime during the spring of next year. In terms of the resource projections, yes, we do have, a forward look at resource projections. That's something that, we continually keep under review, and the nearer we get to any particular day of operation, we have increased levels of certainty over what the resource levels will be. The industry timescales for making changes to the timetable are still at 8 weeks look forward. So the changes that we made, were consistent with those industry timescales, although, we are keen to push those timescales back out to the 12-week notice period that occurred before the pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Patrick. Can't see any other colleagues indicating. I'll conclude on this part of the discussion before we move to Northern and Susan, I'm sorry.
So no, I was just wanting to clarify if we're going through the operators. That's fine. Thank you, Andy. I think you're just about to say that.
Yeah, just going to move on to hear from both, Susan. So I'll conclude, Andy. I'm so sorry. You said that there've been improvements, and I think 2023 has been better than 2024. But the feeling from people within this city that I represent is still that this service is not where it should be by any means, and there is a lot of frustration about it. I mentioned the figure of a quarter of services arriving on time. I mean, that isn't a reliability standard that is good enough. But also the travelling experience. People will talk about toilets being out of order, no hot water for tea or coffee in the buffet car, no cards can be accepted in the buffet car because the equipment's not working. Appreciate you've been upgrading trains, but the customer experience has not been what it should be. I can see you've come off mute at that point. Did you want to say something about that, Andy?
If I could, Chair, picking up on those specific points, we have a new sales system that is about to be deployed out on the trains, which will improve reliability, and our supplier Alstom is about to start the fitment of new coffee machines on our Pendolino fleet as well. So there are investment programs that have been in the pipeline for a while now that are going to start to come to fruition to address those customer service pain points that you've rightfully drawn attention to, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I mean, it is things like toilets being out of order, these kind of issues, when people are on crowded trains, really can make travelling very unpleasant indeed. So I'm going to conclude, Andy, by saying this. I think the summary from our point of view, and I do reflect, I think, opinion on the west of the Pennines particularly, is that 2024 needs to be better, quite a lot better than what we've had in 2023 and 2022. And I can see Councillor Swarbrick nodding at that. I think that would be the feeling, I think, across the parties and across the geographies. And you were clearly working hard to address the issues, and I can see you've made some progress. But what I'm going to ask is that either you or a representative of Avanti come back here every 3 months through 2024 so that we can monitor very closely what's happening to this service. And I'm afraid, we would not accept any deterioration from where we've been. It only should be moving in one direction next year on all counts. And that's what we'll be holding you to account to see. I appreciate, you're there and you're working out the Mayor's office today, and that's a good thing to see. And, that's a positive way to be working. But, as I say, I've explained clearly how people feel here. It has a real impact on our economy. This isn't just kind of idle whinging for the sake of it. When your service is underperforming, it hits us. We suffer as a result of that. And we can't accept that damage to our economy on an ongoing basis. So thank you, Andy. Appreciate your update. We do have colleagues from Northern and TransPennine with us as well. So we've got Tricia and George. I think colleagues on the call will probably be reasonably familiar with where both main operators are up to. So perhaps just a brief word from both of you, if that's okay, and then we'll go into members' questions. Tricia first, maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So without repeating what I spoke about last time, performance is not where we want it to be. I can assure members of that. Cancellation performance is driven by three key things in our train crew. We have a healthy establishment of train crew, I'm pleased to say, but sickness is tracking much higher than certainly it is in our resource plans, even though we've actually increased that percentage in our resource plan. Sundays isn't in the working week for a lot of our train crew, and we're seeing some issues around that, and skills. So I spoke last time about the need for us to have a good training beat rate, and we had planned to have rest day working certainly in our plans for last year and this year, and we hadn't had a rest day working agreement since January 2022. I'm pleased to say since the last committee meeting we have agreed a rest day working agreement with ASLEF locally for our drivers. We have started to implement that this week, so only yesterday our drivers will have made themselves available, and then we will be using those precious rest day working days to address our training work bank, and that should start to trickle through this week, and then get a really good drumbeat in the coming weeks. Whilst we don't need a rest day working agreement for services because we have that healthy establishment, because of sickness, it gives us a secondary benefit of being able to address some spikes in sickness with our rest day working agreement. Now it's only for 6 months, but we will definitely be using every single precious rest day working day we can to address training and some service issues. In terms of sickness, not to repeat myself from the last meeting, the thing that has changed here is we have now appointed Optima, who will be our new occupational health provider, and they will start in February, and we're working with them to look at how we can accelerate moving some referrals across to them. We are seeing poor performance in our current supplier, so moves there, positive moves forward there. And the only other thing I just wanted to mention in the interests of time is our rolling stock strategy. So our new trains programme is a big priority for us, and Transport for North have said that we could have an agenda item at a future committee meeting to talk about our rolling stock strategy, and Rob Warnes, you heard from earlier, is the sponsor of that programme, and we're in phase 1 of that programme at the moment, which is the development and agreement of a business case. RMP obviously key in that, in making sure we follow all the necessary processes with the Department for Transport, and that is to replace our oldest fleet, the 15X fleet, in line with TRU requirements as well. We'll be looking at bringing in the capacity for digital signalling, and we're looking for a supplier really to provide us with new trains, but also a multi-mode, multiple units, to make sure that when we can, we'll swap out diesel for battery or electric units during their lifetime, and we'll be looking for an associated maintenance and technical support and spares supply agreement as well. And we do want to engage with our stakeholders on design. We've got good insight from our customers, we've got good insight from our own teams because of our recent new trains programme, the 331s and the 195s, but clearly it would be good for us to come along and engage with you as stakeholders to share our plan for our new trains.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tricia. George?
Thank you, Chair. So a fair bit of commonality for TV with the Northern update you've just heard. Hopefully you've been able to experience some slightly more positive performance from us over the last month. It's been the most settled period that we've had between the 7th of October and the 7th of November, which has allowed us both to deliver some good positive customer service, but also to start whittling down the training backlog that we have in the background. So members will be aware that we talked about a 55% backlog over the course of the summer, so we're getting that down towards about 68% of drivers who have all the competencies we need now. So that is making good progress. We've also put a lot of energy into preparing ourselves for the December 23 timetable and making sure that we'll be able to continue that training work through that timetable, and starting to work out how we can build our services back when we get to the right level of train crew competency. So I think mostly that's going positively. I think that you'll have noticed a number of challenges, particularly those who were out travelling this morning, that we've had a number of landslips across the network, which have unfortunately combined to create quite a bit of disruption over the last couple of days, which is clearly cutting against what we've been able to achieve so far. But we are working through all of that with Network Rail. I know there's a lot of engineers out on site fixing those issues right now, and I believe we've got a bit of a more of a detailed session in the private area to talk through some of our rolling stock strategy points.
We do, George. So thank you for that. I think obviously there have been weather challenges in recent times, and obviously the impact of half term I think was felt to a degree. But overall, I think we can still see some signs of positive progress. So that's certainly an improvement from where we were. So thank you. Open to colleagues. Actually, just one eye on the clock, everybody, because we do want to go into those private issues. Susan.
Yes, just quickly then, 3 questions. One for TPE. So the improvements you've seen, notwithstanding what's happened in the last 24 hours, but do those fit with the recovery plan? Are you overshooting recovery plan, undershooting your recovery plan? So how does that fit with that? Second, on Northern, can you, obviously with the timetable change, we're obviously a bit concerned about shorter trains. Can you measure the overcrowding on trains? We're particularly thinking to Doncaster. So is there some way you can give us some monitoring going forward about how that's impacting on people? And secondly, I now have a new interest in train stock with the Nova conversation. So you're obviously purchasing new trains. We'd like to be involved in how we're going to increase the fleet for the whole of the North, and how that fits as part of what we discussed last time, which is what is a rolling stock strategy for the whole of the North and all the operators, really, so it all complements each other. So just a bit of commitment to keep us involved in that as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Any other colleagues wishing to contribute at this point? Oliver?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I don't think it comes as a huge surprise, but just to kind of express some disappointment at the level of Northern Services cancellations in South Yorkshire. We're at about 10% at the moment, which is not helping anybody in terms of customer trust and reliability, and especially on those routes with hourly services. I think that's where my team are particularly telling me there are challenges. So would appreciate any reflections on any of that, or commitments that might be able to be made about improvements.
Thanks, Oliver. So Tricia, could you pick up both the points made by Susan and Oliver?
Yeah, will do. So yeah, apologies for the cancellations that you have seen. And as I mentioned before, we're confident that with the rest day working agreement, that will help us to address some of those skills shortages that we've seen. And that gives us, what that does is it gives us more train crew with more ability to cover different types of traction, different types of route. So where we do see the sickness spikes, we can then prioritise certainly the use of our training days to make sure we can address those areas that we have been more adversely hit. So that's what we are on with right now. And with the timetable change in December, on the 10th of December, for us it is largely as is today, with the exception of some movement of units, which I'll come on to. But what that has given us the ability, and particularly in the sort of Yorkshire area, is to make sure that our link structure, so those links that roster both conductors and drivers, that we are optimising the ability for us to move our train crew across them, and we're not causing ourselves some problems. So we've been able to get some agreements locally with union reps to optimise those links. So that is certainly a positive move for us when it comes with the timetable change. And just on the movement of units and the changes that you'll see in the number of carriages across the network, yes, we can measure and monitor the footfall, shall we say, and the customers who are using those services. We've got an ability to count passengers, for example, on our trains, so we can then make sure that we are reviewing how effectively the timetable changes have been, and then we can look at demand and insight from our customers to check and review if that is something that we can maintain going forward, or if we need to adapt and strengthen in some areas.
Okay, thanks, Tricia. Oliver, is that new one or?
It is new. I think what I was particularly looking for was any sort of understanding of when we might see some improvements to those figures around the cancellations, which was the particular question.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to predict, you know, a step change from, I don't know, 6% down to 5% down to 4%, because we literally just got the agreement last week. So it is something the team are just working on. We've asked our drivers to make themselves available. They've made themselves available this week, and then we'll be able to start planning that. We've already got the plan for the training. What I can't confidently say is if that's got any impact in the very short term on services, and we'll know within the next week.
Right. Could you write to me and let me know, please? And you have more details. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, Oliver. And thanks, Tricia. George, I think there were issues related to rolling stock that Susan raised, but we could probably pick that up in the private item, if that's okay, and if Susan's okay with that. Want to come back in, Susan?
No, I think the question for TPE was different, wasn't it? I think I said, what did I say? Sorry, I'm looking at the next item now.
I think there was a question about whether we were on plan with
Yes,
our driver
that's it.
training
That was it,
stuff.
yes.
So the answer is yes broadly. I think that the challenge comes for us is in the next year we are forecasting quite a large number of drivers will leave the business, and while we've got people coming up behind to take their place, the issue is making sure that we bring those people through to competency as quickly as possible. So that's what the December 23 timetable is designed to allow us to do, and make sure we do that without a detriment to the service for our customers. But that will be the core challenge of next year. But we're on track as we stand.
That's positive to hear. Thanks, George. Thanks, Susan. Okay. I can't see any other colleagues indicating. So we will move on if that's okay, everybody. Martin Tugwell, just looking in your direction, we've got some fairly kind of routine items here, haven't we, to conclude our agenda today? And I'm conscious that I do want to spend at least 10 minutes on the Nova trains issue in private session, and also the Manchester Task Force, 5 minutes on that, perhaps. So is there anything that is essential to do at this point, or can we now move into private session and perhaps defer these items to our next meeting?
Chair, I'll just look to Darren and David just to confirm, but if we can, I would agree that we focus on the moving into private session to deal with those issues that you've touched on. So David and Darren, is there anything that we can't?
There's nothing from my point of view, because the infrastructure one is going to be picked up at the TfN board next month, so that's fine. The business plan one, yes, deferring that to the next meeting is fine. It's still before the TfN board needs to take a decision on this, but I will be happy to receive any comments from members in the interim.
Excellent. That's helpful, David. Thank you. Okay, so does that allow us to move on, everybody? And I have to move now.